Hello, we are back to learn a little bit more about identity providers, and specifically to Keycloak one. Just to recap that we are actually here working to have our identity provider, so users and services can actually authenticate to our system, right? So let's try to bring up our Keycloak on our local environment using Docker Compose, and we will basically need to set up a Docker Compose YAML file, and you are going to declare here our Keycloak, which will be using this image from the internet, so it's available publicly. And you have done a Keycloak local hostname. Then we have set the port that we want our Keycloak to run, and then we set the admin username and password to access the admin console. And we also are mounting a volume here where we are going to add some configurations for our Keycloak. And then we'll just start it and with a few parameters and just health check, and here saying that we are ignoring host names verification. And so let's just dive into the helm. So when we are starting Keycloak, we have the option to set up few things through the YAML, or they say helm files. And we are going to use, you have few options to set up Keycloak. You have helm files, you have the console UI, and also you have APIs, right? So we are going to be using actual helm files for that. And I'm going to just go very quick here through some items that I think it's important to mention here. One of the things is, first, we are setting up a new tenant. We'll call it tenant A. So Keycloak, it's kind of separate. You can have multiple tenants on the same Keycloak instance. And it basically it will be using these tenants when you are creating multi-tenant applications, right? So each client, you might have different configuration, and you use this tenanted information to separate those. Okay, so next we actually set clients, and this client here is basically, it's a client configuration that you'll be using in your application. So then it's called client, and basically here I'm creating a client app test login client, and I'm just setting the name and ID for it, and I'm saying where the root URL for this client. And this here, it will be the port that you're going to have our gateway running, right? And next thing here, we will actually set a secret, because you need to pass the client ID and client secret as part of the authentication flow. We are going to see that a bit later. And here we just say where the authorized redirects URI are. So you actually authorizing redirect to anywhere in any actually URI, so endpoint. And he would say that the origin is from anywhere. Here we're just saying that we are going to using OpenAI ID protocol for our authentication, right? And here there is few attributes that you can actually pass to this configuration. None of them here is really relevant. So when you set up your authentication, you would basically have to see all the available ones. So this is basically the basic and is not really relevant in general. But the one that I wanted to mention here is this one here, the logout one. So it's very important, because when the user log out from the Keycloak, it would actually call this endpoint, and you should have a way to kind of clean up the session in your applications if you have any. Here, next, we are actually saying what mapping some information that will be in the token itself, because this is flow that you're going to be using, ODC uses access token and ID token. And here you're just basically saying some information that you want to include in our token. For example, I want to include the app name, right? And as part of the in the scope of the token. This is the protocol, and here we are basically saying that it will be my app test will be assigning to the app name attribute in the token. And here we are basically saying that you use the user info token, and you want to include the ID token too as well, and the access token. So basically this will be two tokens that will be returned at the end of the authentication. Here we are including client host as well. So basically just setting this, I'd say this attribute to the token itself. So we're going to see those later when you will generate our token, or we are going to finish our authentication flow. And here's some more attributes, so we don't need to go through all them. Some stuff that you are passing here that we're saying that you use OpenID and SSO, so single sign-on will be enabled. What else here? This basically finishes the first client. So we have actually two clients right, set up. This is for the user login one, and then we're going to create another client that would be used for service authentication. And you call this type of authentication client credentials authentication, where you will not actually require a user to log in, put the username and password. For the first one, it would be required that, but for the second one, we'll just pass the client ID and client secret, and that will be enough to kind of authenticate our service. That's why it's used for services, because it not requires username and password, but just identifying the client secret. Okay, that's here our client secret, and the rest of the information is basically the same. So that just you have the protocol mapper here as well. So just add app name and my app name branch, just to give an example of protocol mapper for the credentials versions. We here included our audit as well. We're going to learn a little bit more what is audient, and this is prefix for audient in the OpenID protocol. And also we include the subject as well. So we're going to go, this is kind of part of the OpenIDC protocol. So we will kind of talk about this later. So for now, I just say that we are actually adding those attributes to our token. And it is basically that from the client registration. Now let's see at the users. We have included here a user that will be using to login, right? So you have created this super user, and the first name it's super, and last name it is user, and you have added email, and you have said that the email was verified already, it's enabled. And here I actually added one more attribute. So we add a user ID attribute that would be added to the token as well, the job token. And you have added here an ID, and you are saying that the credentials would be password, and the value it would be super user as the password, right? And it is basically that. Another thing that we have created two rows, so admin and user. So this admin group privileges and the user privileges. And then you have some client scope here that it's it will be OpenID, right? So just to say that we are using OpenID protocol as part of this authentication. Protocol mappers. So we have added some extra attributes to a token from the protocol mapper, and this is actually going to go to all the clients. Before we kind of added protocol mapper information for each client itself, and here you kind of add the one for all the clients that you have. So we are always going to include a tenant name to our job token, and this case would be tenant A always, right? And we are just saying that you're going to include the ID token and access token for all the clients. So this is a way to kind of cross client, right? And we have the option to do client by client and do a generic for all the clients. And you're best to say user ID as well, include the user ID here, attribute, and I think somewhere here we are saying that to come from the user attribute. So this information here is important. It's interesting one, because you actually say that you always add user ID, and you're gonna get the user ID value from the user attribute, right? User ID. So it's basically what you have added to our user, here, attributes, user ID. So we'll take the data from here and add to our token. And this is basically covers them all. We also said that this will be available for SSO, single sign-on. So basically, if you are already logged in another application, you will now request the username and password again because you are already authenticated. So just go and return the token. And so basically, that's the base configuration that we're gonna have for our Keycloak to start with. And let's try to start it. I'm gonna just run here Docker Compose up. And it is started. And we are gonna go here on the Keycloak. Docker host 9,000. And we have here admin and password. Loading the administration console. I've never seen this before. Why it's okay. So basically here we have our console, and here there is the different tenants. So you could have different kind of, if you have multiple tenants, you could set up the tenants for. So basically, if you have multiple companies or tenants in your application, you could have different users for each tenant. So that's why this tenant A here, it could be the name of the company or things like that. You can see the clients here that you just set up. You have created client credentials test and the app test login client. And you kind of can see some extra information here that we added. So default roles, tenant A, and yeah, there is a lot of things here that you can kind of set up through the UI, but it's this is the same, and that's the same we had and configured on the YAML file. User, and so you can the users, you can see here our super user, and UI is not again. And yeah, so basically this is the UI version of what you have just set up through the configuration file. And here we now can actually perform the login. And for that, we need to kind of follow a URL. Then it will be realms. Let me just grab it here from our in order to use that authentication. We will use this here. So now that we have it running, we can go, you can see that this is the Keycloak, right, port, and you go to the helm and you say tenant A, and you're going to use protocol OpenID connect, and you want to authenticate using OpenID, right? And you expect to have a response as a code. We're going to see a little bit about the OpenID later. And here we pass the client ID that you want to use as part of all this authentication, right? And you're going to say where you want to redirect after the user authenticate, right? So the user would be, the user would go straight to the OpenID identity providers to perform the login. But after the login, the user should be redirected to somewhere, right? In our case, it would be our authentication gateway, right? So actually the flow will be trying to go straight to authentication gateway. And because you are not logged, you're going to be redirected to the IDP, and then you'll be showing the username and password. So when you finish the login, if you go back to the authentication gateway, and the subsequent information should get the job token, and you want to be calling authentication with the job token, and it would be the authentication gateway will be validating your token and forwarding your requests to the final destination. So we are actually here, and we are skipping the authentication gateway. Yeah. So you're just trying to go to straight to RDP and see if you can log in, right? So let me try it now. And this is the tenant A. You can see this is the login, not to the access, the Keycloak as we did before, but this is the place to log in into our application. In this case, tenant A, client test. So let's try here, admin and password, as we did before to access the Keycloak, just to show you that this is not the expected credentials. The right credential is super user, super user. And actually worked. This is because we after logging, we are redirecting to somewhere that we don't have yet running, which it will be our authentication gateway. And so this is actually worked. You can see now here that it was redirected, successful. Before, when you're trying to log in with the wrong credentials, it was actually complaining to insert the right credentials, and now succeeded, and automatically redirected to this port, which we set up in our client configuration. So let's pause it here. This is the Keycloak setup. You're gonna just look at the OpenID flow so you can understand what has happening, just happening here. Okay. See you in the next lecture.